Helo, shwmae, a croeso i'r sesiwn Carlam Cymru. Hello, and welcome to this session for A-Level English Literature for Carlam Cymru. This is session number 2 of the Unit 3 section, which will be Section A of Pre-1900 Poetry, that is analysis of the named poem in your collection. Okay, so let's have a quick breakdown of the Unit 3 exam paper, considered one of the most tricky papers, but in actual fact, it's absolutely fine. So it's a 2-hour paper. It's an open book, clean copy paper, which means that you are able to take in a clean copy of the text that you have been studying, obviously no notes, and it is broken into 2 sections. Both sections are worth 60 marks each, 120 marks total for the paper. So section A, as we can see, 60 marks total, is separated into 2 questions. The first is the named poem or extract question with 15 marks, which we will be covering today in this session. And the second question is the essay question for your named collection. That's with 45 marks. And section B is the unseen poetry comparison with 60 marks. The named poem essay question and the unseen poetry comparison have both been covered in session 1 of the recording. So if you have a little look in the Carlam Cymru Teams folder, you should be able to find that recording there. This recording, session 2, will be focusing specifically on that first question, named poem or extract question. 15 marks only, but well worth taking the time to have a look at this session to see what hints and tips there are to make sure that you can write a really, really good first response that arrests the examiner's attention and really shows what you can do. Okay, question 1 then. It's out of 15 marks and you are only assessed through 2 assessment objectives. Those are AO1 and AO2, and their weightings are AO1 is with 5 marks and AO2 is with 10 marks, with double the marks. Those are the only assessment objectives that are covered in this question, this first question. There is absolutely no need to go into any context or any relevant interpretations because you won't be given any marks for them. And that is an error that many candidates make in this first question. So the assessment objectives then, let's break them down and have a look at what exactly they mean. So assessment objective 1 with 5 marks for this question is your ability to articulate informed, personal and a creative response to literary texts using associated concepts and terminology and coherent, accurate written expression. So we can break that down into 3 separate parts. First is informed response to the literary text. Second is using concepts and terms. Okay, so you are marked on your use of terminology, correct terminology, and the application of that terminology in this question. And then coherent, accurate written expression. The examiner at this standard, second year of A-level, is expecting you to be able to write fluently and accurately, meaning no major errors in expression, grammar, punctuation or spelling. So let's have a look at the band 5 breakdown for this assessment objective then. A band 5 response shows sophisticated, creative and individual response to the poem or extract. Your ideas are thoughtful and your response is fully engaged and relevant. So you are fully engaged in the question at all times. Every piece of information that you write down is relevant to the question. A band 5 response also shows confident, perceptive application of literary concepts and terminology. So it's not enough to just plonk the terms in there and hope for the best. You need to really demonstrate that you understand what those terminology, what those terms are, what they mean, and how they apply to this particular poem or extract. your Band 5 response would be effectively organised and demonstrating written flair. Okay, so everything is not just plonked on the paper, it's all purposefully crafted, and you would show high levels of technical accuracy and adopt a clear academic style and register. Okay, so to gain those top marks for this particular assessment objective, you really need to focus on your technical accuracy, your written accuracy, spelling, punctuation and grammar, and also adopt a clear academic style and register. So no slang, no colloquial expression. It really needs to be academic in focus. Assessment objective 2 then, worth double the marks, 10 marks. Assessment objective 2 examines your ability to analyse ways in which meanings are shaped in literary texts. So this is your bread and butter, really. This is your ability to analyse the language, form and structure of the poem or extract and explore through that how meaning is created. Again, let's have a little look at Band 5 then. So to get really good marks in this particular assessment objective, your response will be perceptive, showing sophisticated analysis and evaluation of the writer's use of language and poetic techniques to shape meaning. Okay, so your analysis needs to be sophisticated and you need to really evaluate how the writer has used language, form and structure to shape meaning. It's really digging down into the meaning of particular words and phrases in the poem or extract. Also, Band 5 responses demonstrate confident and apt textual support. Now, that's really, really important. Using textual support to get those really good marks shouldn't just be copying down long lines of poem or extract. It's about being specific, using specific words or phrases or short quotations to support your assertions about what language has been, how the language has shaped the meaning. Then in Band 2, we need, Band 5 of Assessment Objective 2, we also need confident discussion of implicit meaning, hidden meaning. You need to be able to discuss that with confidence. Now, usually this would be an Assessment Objective 5 sort of skill. However, in this particular question where you're only marked on AO1 and AO2, your ability to acknowledge that language and lines of the poem or extract can be interpreted in more than one meaning is tapped here into Assessment Objective 2. Okay, so no further assessment objectives are assessed in the named extract or poem question. And I must stress there that once again, you are not marked on your ability to incorporate context, the context of the poet, or the context of the way in which the poem was written. That's not marked in this question at all, so don't waste time putting it in. Okay, so before we begin then, the importance of correct terminology, and I cannot stress this enough, you are writing about poetry and poets after all. So to ensure that we are hitting that assessment objective correctly, we must make sure that we are using the correct terminology. And what I mean by that is, even just the most simple things like referring to the piece as a poem with stanzas, not paragraphs, referring to the writer as a poet rather than an author, referring to the voice of the poem. These are all terms that are relevant to poetry only. Now, if you're a bit shaky on terminology or you just need a little recap, I've got here an example of a poetry glossary. Now, I will be including this glossary in the Teams folder along with the recording of this particular session for you to have a little look at. They're not all going to be relevant, but they are all poetic terms. And we really do have some that should be quite familiar to you, like alliteration, allusion, assonance, and then we've got the different types of poetry: ballad, ballad, blank verse, and so on. So have a little look at this glossary just to remind yourself what the poetic terms are. This is also really useful for you when it comes to revising for the unseen poetry question. Okay, so that will be in the Teams folder along with the recording. So let's have a look. How should we tackle this question then? You're likely to be opening the paper, seeing this question for the first time. Nerves, that's completely normal. So let's take this question in a step-by-step approach. So I've got 6 steps to answering this question effectively. The first step then is to reread the question and highlight the keywords and commands. Okay, you're going to be asked to look at something specific in the poem or extract. So make sure that you're really familiar with that and you're highlighting what those key things are. Reread the poem or extract that you are directed to without making notes. So just have a little look at the poem or extract that's been named, have a read through, keep calm. Okay, while you're reading then, step 3, get an overview of the poem in light of the task. Okay, so as you're reading, just keep what the task is asking in your mind at the same time. Okay, so you can start to get some ideas together. Then you need to reread the poem again and now make notes. And your notes should be specific. They should be on the poem's tone. What are keywords or phrases? What's the imagery? What are any allusions? What are the poetic techniques that have been used? And so on, based on the task in your answer booklet. Now, these notes can be written, the planning stages can be written in your Pink Answer booklet. That's absolutely fine. In fact, the examiner will be expecting to see some planning. Obviously, they're not going to mark it, but if you have included planning in your exam booklet and you don't want the examiner to look at it, just put a cross through it. Okay, after you've finished with it. If you forget to put a cross through it, don't worry. The examiner will realise that it is planning and won't mark it as your response. Review your notes in light of the key words from the question. Okay, so have a little look at your notes and then revisit that question again. Make sure that you have kept focused on it throughout. And then finally, after you've done all of that, write your response. Okay, focusing on the task, the poem, and AO2. So let's have a look at it in action then. Step 1 is to read the question and highlight keywords and commands. So for example, those of you who have been studying John Donne, this is an example of a John Donne question. Don't worry if you haven't been studying John Donne, the same skills apply all the way through. Okay, so reread "Hymn to God, my God, in my sickness." Examine Donne's use of imagery in this poem. Okay, so we've got excuse me, we've got some annotations here. So first of all then we've got the focus on a specific poem. So that's the first thing you're going to want to highlight, is which poem or extract is being named. Okay, then you're going to be asked to focus closely on a specific technique, and that's the second thing that you need to be highlighting. Okay, and that technique is Donne's use of imagery in the poem. Okay, so you're not going to need to look at absolutely every line in the poem, going through it line by line. That's not an effective use of your time. What you're going to want to do is read through the poem, selecting Donne's use of imagery, and you're going to want a good spread, but not too much. Okay, and then finally, obviously, just remind yourself about the marks. 15 marks, 5 on AO1, 10 on AO2. Okay, so we've got our question, we've got our named poem. Now what do we do? So we take a deep breath. And let's look at steps 2 to 4. So you need to reread the poem or extract you are directed to without making notes. Okay, so just have a quick read through this poem. If you are familiar with the poem or extract, brilliant. Hopefully rereading it will start to conjure some ideas in your mind. If for some reason, however, you haven't studied this poem or this extract, do not panic. this is a 15-mark question in a 120-mark paper. It's not the be-all and end-all. And the likelihood is that the way you have studied the poet's other poems means that you have a knowledge and a general idea of what their likely images and ideas will be. These pre-1900 poets tend to have specific themes and ideas that they run throughout a lot of their poetry, and that is going to be helpful to you. Okay, so get an overview then, step 3 of the poem in light of the task. Just constantly remind yourself, what is it I'm meant to be looking at? Okay, so in this case, Donne's use of imagery in the specific poem. And then you're going to want to reread the poem again, this time highlighting and making notes. Think about the tone of the poem, the tone in the way it's written and also in the way it's performed. Key words and ideas that appear in the poem, what imagery has been used, are there allusions to any other things that run throughout, what poetic techniques have been used and how have they been used, how are they effective. Let's look at the structure of the poem. Okay, and then based on the task, in your answer booklet, you can make these notes. So as I said previously, you can do it in your pink booklet, that's absolutely fine. Or if you'd prefer, you can do it in the question paper itself. The question paper does not go off to the examiner. Once you've finished with it, it's collected in, and then it is just taken to the exams officer. It's not sent off to the exam marker. So if you would rather not put your notes in the pink answer booklet, just in case you forget to cross it out, then it's absolutely fine to do that in the question paper. Okay, so step 5 then, let's have a look. Oops. This is an example of a poem. So remember, we would be looking at this cold. First of all, we would read through just that first read through to get some ideas together and to think about the question in the back of our mind. And then this is an example of how you might annotate that poem when you're creating your notes before you write your response. So you're going to want to spend at least 10 minutes reading through the poem and annotating and making notes. It may sound like a lot of time, but it's not. It's really useful and beneficial, and you are far more likely to produce a much better response if you plan effectively first. So take a little bit of time. You might want to pause this recording to have a little look at these annotations. It doesn't matter if you're not familiar with this poem, or if this is not someone that you have studied. If you're not studying Donne's poetry, it doesn't matter at all, because this should give you a good idea of how much annotation is required and how much time you may want to spend. So have a little look, see the coloured highlights here, that's something that would be highlighted during the exam, and also the annotation. So we've got 5 annotations here. So it definitely isn't about the poem as a whole. Remember, we're looking at the use of imagery. Okay, so make sure you pause this recording and just have a little look at those annotations. Okay, and this is an example then of a written response to that named poem. So remember, the question was asking you to explore Donne's use of imagery in Hymn to God, My God in My Sickness. And this is an example then of a really good opening couple of paragraphs. Hymn to God, My God in My Sickness was written when Donne believed he was going to die. In the opening stanza, Donne describes entering a holy room, meaning entering God's heaven after earth. Musical imagery is used to depict a tranquil and harmonious setting, with God's choir of saints suggesting his time in heaven will be spent serving God, and that he will become music itself, a melodious and harmonious part of the choir of the saints pleasing God. Okay, so What this candidate has done that's effective, in their opening sentence, they've started with just a general overview of the poem. And that's a really good idea, and something that you may want to do. It's just a sentence or two. This one is two very brief lines. And we've started with an overview of the poem. It will help you to focus your discussion of imagery in the poem and alert the examiner to your general understanding of the poem and of the question. So immediately the examiner is going to see that you are focused on the question. Now, in order then to start getting credit from the examiner immediately, you need to make sure that you make a point that relates to the question in your first sentence. So as this candidate has done in the opening stanza, Donne describes entering a holy room, meaning entering God's heaven after death. And they've used integrated quotations there. So instead of a more laborious way of copying out a quotation and then explaining what it means, they have used integrated quotations, which is something that you really should adopt and do because it saves time and it also increases the level of your academic register. Okay, on to the second paragraph then. Donne uses the imagery, so we're still remaining focused on the question. Donne uses the imagery of maps and discovery to describe the way he is being studied by doctors. They will soon discover his journey is leading to death. The metaphysical conceit of Donne, being the map itself, is extended to the third stanza, where Donne uses images of east and west to describe his forthcoming resurrection. Okay, so a nice second paragraph there. And as the annotations show, I need to use a range of examples to show a rich understanding of the poem. Okay, so you're constantly needing a variety of examples of Donne's use of imagery to show that you have that really good understanding of the poem. But not only that, being concise and clear is of the utmost importance. You don't want to beat around the bush, you want to go straight into that analysis. And as the final annotation says, instead of using a line-by-line approach to analysis, by zooming in on that specific image, you're showing the examiner that you can actually be selective and you can choose things that really are the most important examples from this poem of Donne's use of imagery. And just to support that then, let me draw your attention to the fact that this candidate has effectively used poetic terminology throughout. Okay, we've got imagery, we've got metaphysical conceit, and so on. So immediately the examiner can see that this candidate is more than comfortable with those poetic techniques and how they are utilised. Okay. And that's a really good example then of how you could open this kind of question. Now, what I really do suggest is that you really suggest that you revise by practicing this question. That's really the best possible way to revise it. You can make reams and reams of notes on specific poems, and that is also valuable. But if you don't know how to get that knowledge down on paper in the time provided, then it's not going to be helpful for you. So let's get ready for revision then. Let's check what we need to do to actually start to revise for this particular unit. Okay, something that you need to do then is to check the designated list of poems. Okay, so if you have managed to cover all of the poems in the collection, brilliant. If you haven't, make sure that you focus first of all on what you have studied, and then have a look at what you haven't. Now that may be because you were absent from a particular class or because you haven't managed to cover all of the poems in time. If that is the case, then please beware. It is much better now to go and make the notes yourself, annotate that poem yourself if you have missed a key poem from the collection or extract from the collection. Now, once you've done that, you may have a favourite poem, you may have one that you're really familiar with. Great, start with that one. Choose a poem or an extract from the collection that you are going to practice with. The next thing you need to do then is to refer to past papers and past questions for examples of questions and how they are generally worded. And if you start to look at 3, 4, 5 years worth of past questions for this particular paper, you will start to see that they are worded similarly throughout. They're always worded in a specific way. And so you can start to create your own revision questions, not only for this question, but also for the essay questions as well. Okay. So let's have a little think then. Ideas for exploring our chosen poem or extract. So we've got our list of poems that we've got. We've got all our notes together. We've had a little look at some of the past questions and how they're named. Now we're going to have a little look at how we can revise these particular poems. It may seem like a really daunting task, but the more you get on with it, the more you will see the patterns and the repeated motifs. So, ideas for exploring your chosen poem or extract. Firstly, check the meaning of any unfamiliar or unusual words in your poem. So if you've looked through the poem, you've already annotated it in class, you're looking through it again, and there are just some terms and words there that you're not familiar with, make sure you look them up. This is a great way to revise. So, for example, adiphorus in John Donne's Love's Alchemy. You may not be familiar with that word. Look it up and make some notes, okay? You might also want to identify the verse form. Okay, consider the power and effects of the sonnet form, for example, Rossetti's Autumn Violets. Narrative verse and use of rhyming couplets, for example, in Goblin Market. Poets use specific structures and verse forms for a specific means. Now, they don't always do so, but if they have, make sure you're familiar with that particular form, what it's called. This is all relevant terminology. All right, look out for patterns in language and imagery in that poem. Are you seeing patterns that you've seen in other poems that you're familiar with? And let's start to have a look at that. Consider the tone of language choices and the significance of punctuation. For example, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love in Donne's The Canonization. Okay, so let's have a look at the tone of the poem. And is that tone conveyed through specific use of language? Then examine the ways in which the poet creates a range of tones, moods, ideas, and attitudes. How have they used language, form, and structure to create these ideas? This is all a rich way of beginning to revise your specific poems. And you can keep these key questions in your mind at all times. Okay. How to revise again then? Approaches creating your own questions. Okay, so take your selected poem or extract and consider the different angles from which it might be approached. So a great way to revise is to actually create our own questions. Again, when you look at some of the past questions, you will see that they are often written in exactly the same way year after year. So you can begin to predict how the question will be worded. And a great way to revise that is to actually create your own poems. Under the heading, analyse the ways in which the poet presents. Think about the variety of different themes and ideas that could be drawn on. Use these then to form your own questions. Now, these are going to be different for different poets and writers. So, for example, romantic love, religious devotion, self-reproach, fear, women or presentation of women, faith and hope, complex ideas, disappointment. Think about the key ideas that there are present in your collection of poems, and you can start to create your own questions to revise. Okay, exercise and practice then. Now choose 2 to 3 of the themes or topics from your list of approaches and write the first 2 paragraphs of a response for both. Okay, as I said, the best way to revise is to actually write those practice responses. Take careful note of the way you shape your response differently, but relevantly from the very start. Okay, so you might start to see patterns in the way that you write. And as long as you adhere to it really in a focused manner to the question, that's absolutely fine. The more you practice this type of task, the more you will be able the more confident you become, the more aware you'll become for how carefully crafted the response needs to be. No words can be wasted on waffle. You just don't have the time for it. Okay, so traditionally I would say, you know, at GCSE we might have a few cranking up sentences before we get into the actual analysis. You have no cranking up sentences at A level, particularly this level of A level. You've got to get straight into it because you just don't have the time. Okay, finally then, some do's and don'ts. So for the named poem or extract question, do start your response directly and relevantly. Go straight into it with that overview. Do look for patterns of language and imagery. Do make and support points succinctly. No waffle, go straight into it. Do use tentative language, and I said this in recording one as well. It is much better to use tentative language, such as this could imply or this may demonstrate, because that is more academic in style. Do use technical terminology to demonstrate the extent of your understanding. You need to be able to show off a little bit. If you know what the terms are, use them, but don't just use them in isolation. Make sure that you comment on the poet's use of that particular term and how the language is used to shape meaning. Do take care with your expression. Remember to paragraph and to remember to read your response once you've finished. Now, the temptation might be to finish it and then go straight away onto the next question, which is absolutely fine. But if you do that at the end of the paper, please make sure that you go back over all of your questions and don't just skim read them. If you've got time, read through them properly. You will have made some errors. It's human nature, but it's absolutely fine to go back and amend your responses, adding in punctuation or changing words and so on and so forth. That's absolutely fine, and it is recommended. Don'ts then. Don't start at the first line of the poem or extract and work through line by line. Remember, you haven't got time for that, and it's not going to be a purposeful use of your time. You need to be selecting 5, 6, 7 examples of what you've been asked to look at in the poem for this response. Don't write descriptively or narratively about the poem. Being succinct is the key. Okay, so don't just retell what's going on in the poem line upon line upon line. That's not going to get you any marks. Don't write lengthy and clunky introductions. For example, this is a poem written in the 17th century by John Donne in memory of his deceased wife, Anne. That is a very succinct introduction, but do not go on and on and on and on. Don't make extended or extensive references to context. Remember, this is AO1 and AO2 only. You are not marked on context at all. Don't use very long quotations or copy out large chunks of the text. Again, you're not going to be given any marks for that at all. And don't use technical terms descriptively and for their own sake. Don't use terms and do nothing with them. Make sure that you understand what they are and understand how they've been used to create meaning. Thank you very much, everybody. Diolch yn fawr. I hope you found that session useful. Please make sure you check out the folder in Teams for the poetry glossary and also for the session one, which focuses on the essay question and the unseen poetry question. Diolch yn fawr. Diolch.